We're honored to be joined now by Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. He's out with a new book, Unintimidated, A Governor's Story and a Nation's Challenge. I want to talk about everything, including your heroic stand against the unions in Wisconsin. But let me just start. The polls are crashing, and Obama is caught in essentially his third falsehood on this subject. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. If you have someone who didn't have executive experience and they let the political shop in the White House run everything. Political shops, as you know, you and I know in White Houses, Republican, Democrat alike, have a major impact on policy, but they're not the sole force of policy here. And I think that's part of the problem is they made a promise that nobody could actually deliver on, not just in terms of a website, but on the overall policy of Obamacare, which is an abysmal failure. And you and I have talked about it in this show. It's not only a failure for Obamacare, it is continuing to be a wet blanket on the recovery in the nation's economy.
Right, it's anti-growth. But it sort of blows my mind, okay? This guy's a lawyer. I've never had any personal criticisms of him. I don't deal in that currency. But my point is he's a well-known lawyer who taught law. He's making these assertions which are blatantly false. Does he not think in the age of information and Facebook and tweeters and electronic, this is going to come out?
Oh, it's shocking. I mean, to me,
I think people are just as angry at his falsehoods as they are at the breakdown of Obamacare. I really do.
Well, and I think it only gets worse as day by day goes by, and more of these promises we find out were not only not right. It'd be one thing if they were wrong and you were told they're wrong, and you actually believe that people believe that. But the more we find out that there were business, as you said, firm after firm actually telling the White House and the administration that it wasn't going to work, it's either one of those things where they're not listening to the facts or they're not being informed. In either case, it's rather troubling. Troubling.
No CEO experience whatsoever. So you believe, A, Obamacare will be and should be the defining issue in the midterm
I think
election.
There's no doubt about it. You can't, I say in the end, political issues are most significant when you're telling people something they know to fundamentally be true. I think regardless of how people originally thought about Obamacare, overwhelmingly the public realizes this is an abysmal failure, not just the rollout, but the policy itself. And I think the longer that this goes on, the more Democrats are going to run for the hills.
As a governor running for re-election, your third re-election, how do you put Obamacare into the conversation? How do you work it in?
Well, in our case, it's interesting. The only Democrat in the race that got in last month is already trying to make an issue, trying to talk about how they would have taken the expansion, they would have taken the state-run exchanges. I think that might have sounded nice a couple months ago, but as time goes on, I think for those of us who raised question marks about Obamacare, it becomes pretty clear that we didn't want to put our state taxpayers at risk, that we didn't want to be a part of a program that was this abysmal. Having said that, I also think for Republicans, not only in state office, but for federal office as well, we do have to be careful that we don't look like we're relishing this. As much as many of us pointed to these problems early on, raised the red flag of concern, I think we need to empathize with many of our fellow citizens who are going to suffer because of these failures and try and find solutions, not just be the ones pushing it over the cliff.
So, okay, you have argued strongly regarding 2016 in the presidential race, which you are looking at, that it ought to be an outsider from Washington and it ought to be a governor with executive experience. Tell me more.
Well, I asked a simple question. Who would my ideal candidate be? And to me, it's either a former or current governor. In fact, I'd put that both a governor on the ticket, both for president and vice president. It's a little unconventional, but so was Bill Clinton and Al Gore back in 1992, and that kind of pushed the whole youth, next generation movement, and that was key to the 92 election. I think in this case, when you're going to probably clearly Republicans are going to run against an institutional Washington insider, that being Hillary Clinton, who's not just been a Secretary of State and a U.S. Senator, First Lady. She's been around Washington for a long time.
She also campaigned for a single-payer government-run
health care plan. Obamacare is really the second coming of Hillary Care. Remember that back from 93 and on.
But you're ruling out some talented people, including your colleague Paul Ryan from Wisconsin.
I don't say it's an absolute. To me, that's the ideal candidate. I think Paul Ryan is one of the few exceptions in Congress who really steps up and has that reform agenda that we most often see from governors that we don't see enough of in Washington. But I really feel overall there's got to be an anti-Washington sentiment out there amongst both Republicans and Democrats. And the more you can capitalize on that by sending people up that are going to come in from outside of Washington, D.C. with the experience of proven reforming, those are the people we're going to turn to.
If you win this November, you're going to run for president, are you not?
No, I'm focused on being governor. Honest to goodness, and I don't know what the future holds. For me, there's a lot of challenges in my state that still need my attention, still need my focus. And after 3 elections coming this November in 4 years, I get to spend a lot of time focused on the needs of my people.
But saying that, let's look at some of it. Like Chris Christie just gave a talk, Wall Street Journal CEO conference, the new head of the Republican Governors Association. Christie says, quite bluntly, the GOP to reach out, women, blacks, Hispanics. He did. He was very successful in a blue state, New Jersey. Is that a model that you subscribe to?
Yeah, I think you look, there's 750,000 more registered Democrats in New Jersey than there were Republicans. I think that's a great story, and for all the media that trying to downplay that, there may be an exception here or there, but overall, Chris Christie is a solid conservative reformer.
Is he your biggest, do you think he's your biggest opponent?
I think in the end, I think there are 29 other Republican governors who could do just an exceptional job being the top executive in this country. Because as I write in the book, time and time again, the reason to be optimistic if you're a Republican, if you're a right-of-center voter in this country, even after last year's presidential election, is because in the states there are now 30 Republican governors, almost as many Republican majorities, and we're doing the real reforms. We're optimistic. We're speaking in terms that are relevant. We're showing the courage.
I'm going to come back to those reforms. We're going to have a second segment. I want to ask you about difference between Ronald Reagan, Mitt Romney, and yourself. I want to talk about these reforms and also the miracle you did in Wisconsin, taking on the unions and beating them at their own game. Governor Scott Walker took on the public unions. It was an epic battle in order, I think, to save the taxpayers. And guess what? His recall victory was even bigger than his original win for governor. So next up, we're going to take a look at the economic results and talk some more national politics with Governor Scott Walker. I'm Kudlow. Please stay with us. We're back now with Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker. Governor, I want to talk about your epic battles with the unions, but a quick take on what Obama's saying. A quick take. He has this sort of nasty thing that he does against the Republicans, but do you think the GOP was wrong for the shutdown?
Well, I think it was good to put attention on Obamacare, and I'm glad we're back on that. But I said back in August, I thought the federal government was too big, too expansive, too involved in our lives, and we needed to narrow its focus. But for what's left and what's for necessary, it needs to work. We should show that we can make it work and that we've got a viable alternative to it.
You would repeal Obamacare altogether?
Hands down. Easily. But I'd be willing to take a postponement to get things rolling. We don't have the Senate. We don't have the presidency. I would take a postponement just to get things on until the next election.
And, of course, you were very tenacious and determined in your battle against the public unions. You just asked them to pony up more money for health and pension benefits.
Still less than what the average employee in my state.
And you rolled back some of the collective bargaining to help the taxpayers. What's the net effect on the Wisconsin economy of these reforms?
Well, you think about 4 years ago when I ran, the unemployment rate was 9.2%. Today it's 6.7%. 4 years ago we ranked in the bottom 10 in terms of the best and worst states, according to Chief Executive Magazine. Today we're up to number 17. 4 years ago, most importantly, a survey by our statewide chamber of our employers showed that just 4% thought we were heading the right direction. Today, it's more than 94%. So my previous governor's last term, a Democrat, we lost 133,000 jobs. We're gaining jobs. The economy's better.
Being tough pays off. Being tough pays off.
Well, we were able to take a $3.6 billion budget deficit and turn it into just a $160 million surplus. That meant lower taxes, more investments in our schools and higher education, more in worker training, because we made tough but prudent decisions.
But in the book, and I'm going to quote directly, you blast the unions as corrupt and a protection racket. Now, you took them off the hook, if I'm not mistaken. People now no longer have compulsory dues.
That's right.
Are the union rolls shrinking? Are people leaving the union? They
plummeted, just like they did in Indiana when Mitch Daniels did something similar for just state employees. I did it for all employees. And it really is about being pro-worker and pro-taxpayer, because now they get to choose. If they want to be in a union, that's great. If they don't, for a teacher in Milwaukee who otherwise would be stuck paying $1,400, she gets to choose to spend that on her kid's college education or whatever else she wants. That's a lot better than it was before.
All right. In the book, again, I read a lot of the book. It's just a broadcaster who reads.
Well, hopefully a lot of people will read it. It's a good thing for Christmas.
It's a very good read. You're very tough on Mitt Romney, and you pose some contrast with Reagan, and I want to quickly say that. You say Reagan did not dismiss 47% of the country as a bunch of moochers. You say Reagan would never have said, quote, I'm not concerned about the very poor. And you say that Ronald Reagan would never have uttered the words self-deportation. As a Reagan alumnus, a deputy in the Budget Bureau, I agree with you on all counts. Tell me why you singled that out. You knocked Mitt down pretty good, but you're holding up Reagan. In your political philosophy and vision, tell me why you wanted to make
Well, first I want to say Mitt Romney's a great man, would have been a great president, but I think he got poor advice in this campaign that it all had to be about Barack Obama. Why I said that, and And I think the misnomer of that campaign was they looked at that closing argument in the last debate where Reagan said, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, and mistakenly thought that was his entire argument. What President Reagan said, and I went back and researched his inaugural address, or excuse me, his nomination address back in Detroit in 1980, and found some really aspirational words saying, if you're living in poverty, we want to lift you out of that poverty. If you're we want to help you, lift you up, and give you real hope. But it's not hope through the mighty hand of the government. It's by empowering people through the dignity that only comes from work to control their own life and their own destiny. We should be the ones who talk about not providing a safety net, but lifting people out of poverty.
Opportunity.
Most
Social
people don't
mobility.
Want to live in poverty.
It's more of a Jack Kemp message.
Absolutely.
Uplifting message.
They don't want to be dependent on the government. They want to be living the American dream.
Mitt was too pessimistic. He's a great man, fine man, smart man, too pessimistic. In some sense, Obama was the optimist in that campaign. And Mitt
he was falsely optimistic because he didn't have a plan to carry out. Because his optimism was based on the mighty hand of the government. Our optimism should be based on the people, not on the government.
All right, last question. In Washington, I'm still putting you in Washington after you're going to win your November election, which I predict. What would you do? First thing, what would you do? You see the mess down there. You see the problems with the budget, with taxes, with Obamacare. First order of business for a President-elect Scott Walker.
Any person who's in that position, who's in their right mind, should repeal Obamacare and replace it with a market-driven solution. Should cut the marginal tax rate and rein in federal agencies like the EPA and the National Labor Relations Board.
What do you do about your friend Paul Ryan wants to reform entitlements? And also, Ryan has a very interesting riff, which I really like. He says the GOP should spend a little more time worrying publicly about how to help poor and poverty-stricken people.
He's absolutely right.
This, too, was a Jack Kemp message. Kemp was a mentor of mine. This, too, was a Reagan message. Would you go down that route? He's
absolutely right. I write a chapter about it at the tail end. You haven't gotten the end yet. You should read it because that's exactly what we talk about, that middle-of-the-road center voters don't just want us to move back and forth on issues. They want to see that we're compassionate about all people. It's part of the message that not just in the presidential election, but in state and local elections.
Solutions.
Conservatives need to show that we are indeed compassionate. I know that was a phrase that President Bush used, but to show that we are indeed compassionate. But the compassion doesn't always come through more government programs. Compassion is by empowering people to control their own lives and their own destinies.
Fine, a lot of opportunity. Governor Scott Walker, terrific stuff. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Book Unintimidated. It is available now everywhere. As I said, I've read chunks of it. You ought to read it. It's a great read.